Hey there, how there, ho there. It's Jeff Cutter Diamond welcoming you to yet another Cutter Top 10 video to do with hockey, of course. Rocking uh, as my shirt gets stuck, rocking the Toronto Maple Leaf jersey for Centennial Classic on the patch. Um, Last time I did the top 10 number one draft picks in NHL history. Well, let's go with another draft moment. Let's talk about the top 10 NHL draft steals in history. A lot of players, top 20 players get good careers, but there are some players that have great careers that people just don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole or an 8-foot Croat. Da da da. But the fact of the matter is that these 10 have actually been underrated and all that. There will be a partial theme due to Europeans and all that, but back in the day things were different. All right, here we go. Number 10 is Patrick Hornquist, 230th and final player in the 2005 draft, drafted by the Nashville Predators. Now, the 2005 draft was big because this was a draft that the NHL had to scramble to think, how are we going to make the draft lottery? Due to the fact that the 2005 season doesn't exist because of the labor shortage. So they came up with a clever plan. They would give brownie points for teams that didn't make the playoffs in a certain year and all that. So teams like the New York Rangers and Pittsburgh Penguins and Anaheim Ducks actually could get better odds, whereas teams like the Leafs, the Red Wings, and the Habs even, not much. So Pittsburgh won the draft lottery over Anaheim. Brian Burke did bemuse that, saying that it was on purpose because Pittsburgh was about to lose money. Murray Lemieux was a decent owner, but bankruptcy loomed, and the Penguins could easily have gone to another city like Nashville. Like Hamilton. Regardless, the 2005 draft, the 230th and final pick was Patrick Hornquist. People did not expect him to make Nashville's roster that much, but he did. He not only helped Nashville out in the late 2000s, he actually was part of the Pittsburgh back-to-back titles in 2016 and 17 as a player. Ironically, one of those 2 years beating the Predators in the playoffs for the Cup. But yeah, Hornquist has 2 Stanley Cups to his name, so why bother being terrible? Number 9 is Theo Fleury, 166 overall from the Calgary Flames and from Swift Current. Now, there will be times I don't mention a guy's Western team, a minor team because, I don't know. But Theo Fleury was a Swift Current Bronco, and there is a reason why I said that, the name drop that. Anyway, Theo Fleury wasn't a bad player. He was pretty good in the Western Hockey League for the Broncos. The only problem was his size. He was only 5'6", and NHL players and teams were scared of him. Calgary said, "Screw it, we're going to draft him." So he went 166 overall, not half bad, and he defied the odds. He was 1,000-point producer. I think he's the shortest player to get 1,000 points in a career. But nevertheless, he won the Cup with the Flames in 1989, a couple years after he was drafted. He was big. Few people forget in Alberta, especially Calgary, of his famous overtime goal against the Oilers in 1991, Game 6 of the first round, and then sliding around on that celebration, as Chris Cuthbert said, Theo Fleury and the Flames are in seventh heaven. But they lost Game 7 thanks to an Esa Tikkanen hat trick, including overtime. But Theo Fleury was a great player for Calgary, then to Colorado, the Rangers, Chicago. Unfortunately, though, in the latter stages of his career, he would have alcohol abuse, and practically his career just went flatline. Theo said in his autobiography there was a reason, because as a member of the Swift Current Broncos, he was molested by Coach Graham James. And yes, I know I should have put an advisory warning, but that's the way it goes. Unfortunately, the mistrust of Graham James basically led him down a dark path and all that, although it was not seen till his later years and all that. Anyway, Theo Fleury was, I believe, one of the survivors of one of the worst bus crashes in Canadian history, up to Humboldt. Humboldt obviously is number one, but the Swift Current crash saw 4 members die, including the brother of Lindy Ruff, Brent Ruff. They lost 4 members. That was the worst bus crash in Canadian sports history. I know Newfoundland had a basketball team be decimated by a crash in a camper van. But the fact of the matter was that, yeah, this was one of the worst ever. Anyway, number 8 is Yuri Curry going 69th overall. Don't snicker. 1980 Edmonton Oilers. Yep, he came over from Finland. NHL teams were not really willing to spend on Finns. I know Swedes, yes, but Finland seemed to be harboring some resentment because it's like their guys couldn't make it. Although Juha Whitting, who played for the Kings in the early 70s, was Finnish. Rachel's Ruotsalainen came into the league for Finland and all that. Finland didn't really have a respectable goalie till Kiprasov came through. But yeah, Yuri Curry was big. The Oilers wanted some European help and all that. Figured that Curry's speed could help out with the Oilers, so they drafted him in 1980, and it worked. Curry would win 5 Stanley Cups as a member of the Edmonton Oilers. And yes, he did win the cup the year that the Oilers did it so in 1990 without Gretzky, and put up over 600 goals. For the Kings, the Oilers, the Rangers, the Ducks, and the Avalanche. Harry Curry was big and all that. He even spent 1 year. He was even so pissed off of Edmonton management, he spent 1 year in 1991 with Italy before they traded him to Los Angeles. So Yuri Curry was that right wing presence alongside Gretzky and I would say Glenn Anderson because I don't think Messier played left wing. Well, speaking of Messier, I inadvertently said number 7. And number 7 is Marc Moose Messier. 48th overall, 1979 Edmonton Oilers. Now you'd be thinking, 48th? That's too high to be a draft steal. And all that. But there's a bigger story behind it. So, for hockey fans, you should know this. And for non-hockey fans, I got to tell you. In the 1970s, the NHL was competing with the World Hockey Association for player rights and, supremacy. The WHA, like the AFL for football, and the ABA for basketball, were competing teams that actually made the big leagues having to expand and adjust and all that. So the WHA had a team in Edmonton from 1972 to 1979. Yes, they were called the Alberta Oilers their first season, but they were in Edmonton. Anyway, Messier was a good player. In fact, Messier was allowed to play in the WHA as an 18-year-old because the NHL didn't allow 18-year-olds to play in the NHL. You had to be 19 to be drafted. So anyway, Messier jumped to play for the Indianapolis Racers, but they were folding. Then he moved to Cincy, become part of the Cincy Stingers, but they were in trouble, so they had to send him to Edmonton. And Edmonton was absorbed into the NHL, like Winnipeg, Quebec, and Hartford. The rules were that the Oilers had to protect 2 goalies and 2 skaters. They didn't protect Marc Messier. But fortunately, though, no team picked Messier till Edmonton did 48th overall in 1979. And yes, Kevin Lowe was drafted ahead of Messier for the Oilers. But it worked out. Messier fell in Oilers' lap once again. And, Marc Messier played his heart out. Well, I think Messier played for Cincy. He never played for the Oilers in the WHA. Well, damage has been done. But yeah, he won 6 cups. 5 of Edmonton won with the Rangers. He was one of the most respected leaders in NHL history, bar none. Number 6 is Dominik Hasek. Chicago Blackhawks 199th overall in 1983. Of course, the theme of Europeans not getting their due was big. But the fact of the matter is that, back in the 1980s, Europeans were not really trusted in all that. Although the Swedes were trusted. Unfortunately, Hasek played in the Czech Republic. Well, now they call themselves Czechia, which is weird. But yeah, in the Czech Republic. Or Czechoslovakia, sorry. Whatever you want to call it. Unfortunately, they had what they called the Iron Curtain. Basically, communism ruling that country. So Hasek was a good goalie and all that, wearing number 2 when European goalies were 1 and 2. He was pretty good. Chicago thought they needed some help with the goaltending department, so they drafted him in 1983. A lot of people thought Hasek would take his sweet time coming to North America because of the whole Iron Curtain thing. Fortunately, though, by 1989, he was allowed to go to North America to play in the minor leagues, and then Chicago called him up and all that. People forget that Dominik Hasek was a Chicago goalie. Everyone remembers his time with Buffalo and Ottawa. Speed. But the fact of the matter is that Hasek was doing his job. Well, he won 6 Vezina trophies for goalie of the year and 2 Hart trophies for MVP, in which goalies being named MVP were rare and far behind. The last goalie before Hasek to win MVP was Jacques Plante back in 1962. Patrick, no. Anyway, Dominic Hasek did his job in the mid 90s with Buffalo. But I mean, Chicago, people forget that he was the backup for the Hawks in '92 when they went to the finals against the Penguins. It was Belfort, then Hasek, and basically Keaton would change goalies it was going it was going out of style. Chicago had to protect only one goalie for the expansion draft, which saw Tampa and Ottawa get in. So they left. So they decided to trade Hasek to Buffalo. Hasek would back up Grant Fuhr, and Hasek was famously unprotected from the Sabres from the NHL draft that saw Tampa and Ottawa redraft players, and also Florida and Anaheim. No team wanted him, so he was stuck in Buffalo. But a fortunate break to Grant Fuhr, so that happened as Hasek would be the main guy in Buffalo and won the 2 Hart trophies late, like big. Number 5 is Dougie Gilmour, drafted 134th by the St. Louis Blues, 1982. Doug Gilmour was his great player. His nickname Killer, and Don Cherry even kissed him on national TV on the forehead. And because it was a Kingston boy. So anyway, Doug Gilmour did his job. So anyway, yeah, Gilmour was a good player for Kingston in the OHL. But anyway, the Blues drafted him 134th overall. They were not too sure about him. St. Louis almost lost the franchise too because Ralston Purina wanted to sell the team, and Saskatoon almost got the Blues, but Harry Ornest got the team. Anyway, Gilmour was known for his tenacity. In 1986, with the Blues, the Monday Night Miracle, he was on that team, and then he was traded to Calgary, horror of horrors, in exchange for Brett Hall. So Gilmour did win the Stanley Cup in 1989 with the Flames, getting revenge on the Blues and all that. And then he was massively traded in the 10-player deal, January 2nd, 1992. Leaf fans remember the day that the Leafs finally became more relevant because of the Harold Ballard years just making Toronto look like shit in the 1980s. Anyway, Dougie Gilmour did his job for the Leafs in that 10-player deal. He put up over 120 points in 1993, had a 7-assist game to tie the Leafs record, and almost won the MVP, but didn't. I was going to say that was Gretzky, but that can't be Gretzky. Who won MVP in 93? I can't remember. But anyway, yeah, Doug Gilmour did his job for the Leafs, and then the Devils, Blackhawks, Sabres, and Habitants, even the Habs. But yeah, he'll always be good. Unfortunately, though, his career would end in horror after the Habs traded him to the Leafs. The Leafs fans were salivating, but Gilmour ended up injuring himself first game in Calgary thanks to Dave Lowry's hit. And that was it. Number 4 is the guy who was traded for Gilmour in that 1988 deal. It was Brett Hall, picked 117th overall by the Calgary Flames. Well, Brett had some pedigree coming into the 1984 season. He went to Minnesota Duluth, played for them, and the Flames said, "How about that?" Brett Hall had the pedigree. His father, Bobby Hall, is of course the Golden Jet, 500 or 600 plus goals as a member of the Chicago Blackhawks in the NHL. And then he came back after the WHA was absorbed in the NHL with Winnipeg and Hartford. His uncle Dennis was also a decent player too. Brett was one of 6 children and all that. He was the most powerful one, they said. Brett would be huge in Calgary. But unfortunately for him, things would be bad. Brett Hall was so disillusioned with not being picked for Canada's World Junior team or some kind of tournament. He decided to switch his citizenship to the U.S. because Bobby had American citizenship too. So he went to the U.S. to play for the U.S. hockey teams and all that. Even though we all know he was born in Belleville, Ontario. But yeah, Brett Hall was good. He was good, but he was actually lazy. People called him lazy, saying that he didn't want his talent. Calgary was so pissed off they traded him to St. Louis in the deal that saw Gilmore head to Calgary. It worked out. The Flames won the Stanley Cup. The Blues didn't. Brett Hall would go off on a tangent. 86 goals in 1991, including 50 goals in just 49 games. So Brett Hall was just that damn good and all that. He would score a lot of goals, not a lot of assists. Brad would mellow out over time as he left St. Louis for Dallas and then went to Detroit, winning the Cup with the 2002 Red Wings, and even played for the Coyotes, which was the spiritual ancestor of the Winnipeg Jets, where Bobby Hall played. So it all worked out. Number 3 is Lucky Luke Robitaille, 171st overall, 1984 LA Kings. In the ninth round, the Kings took this guy from Quebec by the name of Luke Robitaille. It was basically a flyer and all that. It was even such a big move that Robitaille was actually drafted lower than a major league pitcher that I think it's in the Hall of Fame. I can't remember. Because, yes, LA Kings drafted Tom Glavine in the 4th round. Tom Glavine was actually a decent hockey player in Massachusetts. He was also a good baseball player and chose baseball over hockey. Good move. He was part of the 4 aces of the Braves in the 1990s. So, anyway, and also in 1984, I believe Kirk McCaskill was drafted by an NHL team. He would later play for the Anaheim Angels. But anyway, yeah, Luke Robitaille was drafted lower than a Major League Baseball pitching icon. That's what makes it worse. But Luke brought up through the system. He wowed everyone. And yeah, he played for the Hall Olympique. I remember now. And then, he was big. LA got their left wing power guy. And he was, at one time, be the highest scoring left winger in NHL history. Got to the Hockey Hall of Fame. Did well for LA, then Pittsburgh. Then you went to the Rangers and then back to LA again. And to the Red Wings for the 2002 Stanley Cup run. But yeah, Robitaille even appeared in an episode of How I Met Your Mother when they talked about Robin Sparkles behind the music. And Luke Robitaille said that he would listen to Sandcastles in the Sand, the song by Robin Sparkles, and have a good cry. He wasn't ashamed. I can't believe they brought Luke Robitaille on the show. Anyway, that's up. Number 2 is Pavel Datsyuk, 98. We're at the Red Wings, 171st overall. Datsyuk was this powerful Russian back when Russians were talked about in positive terms, not negative terms like nowadays. But yeah, Datsyuk was dazzling, number 13 in your programs. Always a Red Wing. He never played for another team. He was good, very good. Stick handling, including a couple of highlight reel goals against Dallas, including 2003, when Dallas were wearing their jerseys known as the Motorists. I don't want to explain myself. Anyway, yeah, he won multiple Selke trophies for best defensive forward, got Detroit to a couple Stanley Cups, and it worked out for him. Datsyuk was an icon. He left to go back to Russia, where he could have played for another team, but no. But Datsyuk was a decent player. I think he's an assistant coach now. Can't remember. And finally, numero uno is Henrik Zetterberg. Datsyuk's teammate, Robitaille's teammate, Brett Hall, Dominik Hasek. There is an underlining theme in this because 5 of the top 10 draft steals of all time all play for the same team, the 2002 Detroit Red Wings. Zetterberg and Datsyuk were career Red Wings. Robitaille, legendary King and Penguin among others, but he was a Red Wing at that time. Brett Hall, great St. Louis player, he was a Red Wing at that time, and so was Dom Hasek, one of the best Sabres goalie of all time. Sorry, Ryan Miller. But Zetterberg was big. 210th overall. That's a lot. It wasn't the last pick in the NHL draft, but it could have been. Sweden had some great players and all that. A lot of people thought this was torture because, the Iron Curtain was opened up. Well, Sweden never fell under the Iron Curtain. And this was the year that a pair of Swedes, Daniel and Henrik Sedin, would be drafted by the Canucks thanks to Brian Burke's tactics. But yeah, Zetterberg was there and he scored some great goals. One highlight reel goal was it 07 or 08 against Colorado in the playoffs? He basically did kind of a 360 and then shot the puck on his backhand in goal for a hat trick. So, Zetterberg, number 40, he'll always be remembered by Red Wings fans everywhere. Anyhow, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.